Every night, a decision is made in silence. No announcements, no thunder from the sky. Just a pillow, a dark room, and a soul, unguarded. You may not remember the last words you whispered before sleep, but heaven does, and so does the enemy. Padre Pio warned, "What you do in the final moments of your day can either open your soul to grace or expose it to the whispers of darkness." Lucia of Fatima said, "There are nights when the Virgin comes close, but finds no door open." What if the thing you skipped tonight was the very act that blocked heaven from entering? Stay with us until the end. Because a forgotten gesture, a short prayer, and a moment of surrender could change not only your sleep, but your eternity. And at the end, we will pray together. Don't miss it. Each night, as the world slows and silence fills the home, a decision is made, often unconsciously, that determines the soul's condition until morning. For many, this decision looks like nothing at all. There is no prayer, no gesture of surrender, no act of remembrance. The body collapses into sleep, exhausted or distracted, and the soul is left exposed. This omission, seemingly minor, is one of the most spiritually dangerous patterns a Catholic can fall into. Padre Pio warned that the devil does not rest when the body does. Instead, he watches, waiting for vulnerability, for doors left open by forgetfulness. The soul that does not consecrate its rest becomes available. Unguarded territory in a spiritual war that does not pause at nightfall. Lucia of Fatima once wrote that the Virgin Mary watches especially closely at night, not because it is holy in itself, but because it reveals the heart's disposition. A soul that ends its day without addressing heaven has spiritually gone to sleep long before the body follows. The mistake is subtle. It doesn't feel like rebellion. It feels like fatigue, distraction, routine. But what it truly is, spiritually, is abandonment. It is a retreat from God in the final moments of the day, when the soul is most malleable and when grace is most needed. Padre Pio understood this vulnerability. He called it the hidden hour, when angels are near and demons circle quietly, looking for souls that did not ask to be guarded. Those who sleep without prayer often wake with burdens they do not understand. Unexplained fear, heaviness, bad dreams, emotional agitation. These are not always psychological. They are spiritual, aftershocks from a night spent unblessed. A soul left in silence is not necessarily in peace. It becomes a quiet place for spiritual interference. Many faithful unknowingly train themselves to treat the night as secular time, a break from God. But sleep is not a spiritual pause. The soul does not cease to be present to heaven just because the mind shuts down. This is where the error lies. The devil has no power to create, only to twist what is neglected. And when the final act of the day is mindless scrolling, bitter rumination, or collapsing into unconsciousness without a single glance toward God, the soul becomes spiritually dim. It gives no signal that it belongs to the light. The Church has always seen the end of day as a sacred moment. Compline, the final hour of the divine office, was not a ritual of formality, but of protection. It was a final sealing of the day with the presence of Christ, a way to ensure that what began in grace ends in grace. When this is skipped, the soul may still belong to God, but it has not placed itself in His arms. Padre Pio insisted that even a simple sign of the cross, a whispered act of contrition, or a single line of surrender before sleep becomes a shield. Without it, the night becomes spiritually neutral, And neutrality is a lie in a world where good and evil battle constantly. To end the day without God is to give the enemy permission without realizing it. It is not an invitation, but it is an absence of refusal. The devil looks for silence not just in the church, but in the bedroom, and that silence, if not filled with prayer, becomes an echo chamber for accusation. Lucia understood this in the visions she received. She saw how souls that thought themselves safe were slowly eroded by repeated neglect, until even their dreams became shadowed. It didn't begin with sin, it began with spiritual forgetfulness. The nightly mistake is not what people do, it is what they leave undone. And unless it is corrected, the soul continues to enter sleep unguarded, night after night, until it forgets what protection feels like. This happens because modern life has trained the soul to prioritize the visible over the invisible, the urgent over the eternal, and the physical over the spiritual. The end of the day, once seen by saints as a sacred moment of surrender, has been reduced to a shutdown process. For most people, the day ends in noise, distraction, or exhaustion. The soul, dulled by overstimulation, no longer recognizes the threshold between waking and sleeping as spiritually significant. People fall asleep to screens, to internal unrest, to unresolved anger, to emptiness. And because the body craves only rest, the soul is often left unguarded, unheard, and unoffered. This is not intentional rebellion against God, but it is a form of spiritual erosion, a habitual neglect that wears down interior awareness until the sacred becomes irrelevant. Padre Pio warned that the devil takes advantage not only of sin, but of spiritual apathy. When the mind is cluttered and the will passive, demonic influence requires no open invitation. It enters through absence. An unprayed day end is like a house with no locked doors. This vulnerability is rarely felt because its consequences are subtle. The person wakes tired, anxious, forgetful of joy, spiritually disconnected, but they attribute it to stress or physical fatigue. In truth, what they carry is residue from a night without grace. Sleep, according to spiritual tradition, is not simply unconsciousness. It is the soul's descent into a realm where its defenses depend entirely on its last conscious act. If the soul enters that state unaligned, it remains exposed to influences it would resist while awake, and in that space, evil can whisper without contest. Lucia of Fatima saw this in visions she never fully explained in public. But those close to her testified that she often spoke of the need for protection at night, not because night is evil, but because it reveals the soul's default posture. When someone forgets God in their most private moment, it shows that prayer was never integrated into their being. This forgetting becomes habitual. First a night, then weeks, then months pass where the soul never once closes the day with God. In this vacuum, the enemy establishes patterns: restlessness, strange dreams, spiritual numbness. These are not dramatic attacks. They are gradual disconnections, slowly pulling the soul out of communion. Another reason this happens is because people misunderstand the nature of prayer. They see it as something done only when fully awake, composed, or in a church. They believe that unless they can focus perfectly or feel inspired, the prayer is not valid. But this is a lie. Prayer at night does not require emotional energy. It requires intention. A tired whisper of "Jesus, I'm yours" holds more power than an eloquent litany spoken with pride. Yet people dismiss these small prayers as unworthy, and instead choose nothing, and that nothing becomes the foothold of darkness. Technology has also played a role in deepening the problem. Devices remain in hands until the last second of consciousness. Light, noise, and distraction fill the space once held by silence and recollection. The sacred rhythm of ending the day with gratitude, examination, and surrender has been replaced by dopamine, scrolling, and shutdown. The body sleeps, but the soul is never closed in prayer. The enemy doesn't need people to curse God, he only needs them to ignore him. And every time a person ends their day in silence toward heaven, the enemy gains confidence. Padre Pio understood that this spiritual disorder would increase in modern times. He saw that as people filled their lives with speed and volume, the quiet spaces where God once spoke would disappear. That is why he urged his spiritual children to anchor their days in fixed moments of prayer, especially at night. Because night is the moment when nothing is performed. It is the moment when all roles fall away. And if the soul does not speak then, it reveals what it truly values. This happens because people have forgotten they are souls. They believe their identity ends with physical exhaustion. They see sleep as the body's domain and forget that the spirit remains awake. Angels and demons do not sleep. Heaven does not sleep. Grace flows even in silence, but only when the soul has opened itself to receive it. When that gesture is missing, night becomes spiritually inert, or worse, available. The Church has long understood this. From ancient monastic rules to the simplicity of bedtime prayer in Catholic homes, the faithful were taught to end the day with an act of trust. Not for legalistic reasons, but because that gesture anchored the soul in God. Without it, spiritual chaos takes root gradually, and once the soul becomes used to sleeping without God, it forgets how to wake with Him. This is why the pattern continues. Because the soul, once it ceases to look upward at night, slowly begins to drift. Not in rebellion, but in forgetfulness. And in that forgetfulness, darkness finds its entry. To end the day correctly, the soul must return to its origin before rest. The final act before sleep should never be collapse or distraction. It should be consecration. Lucia of Fatima and Padre Pio understood that true spiritual protection begins not with strength, but with surrender. The right way to close the day is not found in long devotions or complex rituals, but in focused intention, reverence, and humility. It starts with a single conscious choice, to acknowledge God in the final breath of the waking day. This alone begins to shift the entire atmosphere of the soul. Before the body rests, the soul must bow. Padre Pio advised that the first step is to make the sign of the cross. It is not a gesture of habit, but a spiritual boundary. With that sign, the soul declares to both heaven and hell where it stands. This action seals the space and claims the coming hours as belonging to the light. It is followed by an act of contrition, even a brief one, a simple but sincere acknowledgement of sin, sorrow, and need. The soul that repents before sleep enters into rest, not as one deserving peace, but as one forgiven. And that distinction matters. Darkness cannot argue with mercy. Lucia practiced another essential habit, offering the night to the Virgin Mary, not just as a devotion, but as a transfer of spiritual authority. When the soul says, "I place myself in your hands," it no longer sleeps alone. The Blessed Mother, vigilant even when all else is still, becomes the guardian of that soul's silence. It is not a poetic gesture. It is protection rooted in trust. Lucia believed this act invited angels to remain near through the hours when the mind no longer directs the will. Another step is to place a blessed object, such as a crucifix, scapular, or rosary within reach, not as superstition, but as spiritual declaration. This object becomes a reminder to heaven that the soul is marked, and a warning to hell that the soul is not abandoned. Padre Pio often told others to sleep with the rosary in hand or under the pillow, not because the beads had power themselves, but because the presence of that sacred object reshaped the spiritual territory of the room. The faithful must also speak to their guardian angel. This may feel childlike, but it is a weapon. Asking the angel to keep watch through the night is not a request of fantasy. It is a spiritual reality the Church has affirmed for centuries. The soul does not speak in sleep, but the angel does. When invoked with sincerity, the angel stands between the sleeper and every voice that does not belong to God. In spiritual warfare, unguarded silence is dangerous, but silence held under angelic vigilance becomes refuge. Finally, the soul should utter a final prayer, not necessarily lengthy, but real. A few honest words, a thank you, a surrender, a cry of need. The important thing is not eloquence, but presence. This last act becomes the soul's final offering before drifting into stillness, and it is in that offering that grace enters freely. Padre Pio said that a soul who ends their day in the arms of God begins the next already defended, not because of emotion, but because of alignment. This pattern, cross, contrition, consecration, protection, prayer, forms a shield that does not disappear when the eyes close. It holds through the night and prepares the soul for judgment, should it not rise again in the morning. This is not morbid. It is reverent. The saints did not fear death. They prepared for it continually. And since no one knows when the final breath will come, every night must be lived as if it could be the last. Those who follow this path do not fear dreams, do not rise with unrest, and do not wonder where God was in the darkness. They know, because they asked Him to be there. And heaven never forgets to answer when it has been invited. Every night is a gate. Through it, something enters, either grace or something else. Lucia warned that the enemy gains access not through sin alone, but through silence, through neglect, through the absence of consecration. Padre Pio said, "The devil fears a soul that ends its day in surrender." So tonight, don't close your eyes without opening your heart. Don't drift into darkness without speaking once to the light. Say this before you sleep. And if you do, no matter what happens in your dreams, your soul will belong to God. Say, "God, I thank you for today. I ask your mercy for every sin and thought I have forgotten. I entrust my soul to you. I place my heart in the hands of the Virgin Mary. I ask my guardian angel to protect me. And if I do not wake, let me wake in your presence. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen."